Welcome, Duke Alumni and friends, to this session of the Duke Alumni Forever Learning Institute. I'm Tish Futrell, the Director of Academic Engagement on the Lifelong Learning Team in Alumni Engagement and Development, and we are thrilled to have you with us today for this session, Advocating for Self and Others. This is the fifth and final session in our Sense of Self series. And today we'll explore stories and systemic challenges of living with disabilities, and we will engage in a dialogue about building a more inclusive and empowered future. We will have time for Q&A at the end, so feel free to drop your questions in the chat as you think of them. You will be asked to complete a brief survey at the end of this session, and as you know, your input matters. To introduce our speakers today, we're joined by Dr. Henry Friedman. Dr. Friedman is the James B. Powell Jr. Professor of Neuro-Oncology at the Duke University Medical Center and an internationally renowned academic adult and pediatric neuro-oncologist who helps to lead the Preston Robert Tisch Brain Tumor Center at Duke University. He is a committed educator who is a member of the executive and super executive committees of the Duke Medical School, which is responsible for the recruitment, screening, and selection of medical students. Welcome, Dr. Friedman, to the Forever Learning Institute.
Thank you so much. Delighted to be here, and let me go right into it, because we're going to first talk about Jaden Sacks. I first met Jaden when she was applying to Duke and became her mentor as she pursues going to medical school. Jaden is now a senior, majoring in neuroscience with minors in religion and chemistry on the pre-med track, but is also an Alice M. Baldwin Scholar. Jaden has a rare genetic disorder called osteogenesis imperfecta, also known as brittle bone disease, and has dealt with over 25 fractures since age 5. After experiencing the challenges of being a Duke student with a broken leg during her freshman year, we both realized that Duke had a need for more awareness and community for those with disabilities, and accordingly, we co-founded the Duke Alumni with Disabilities Alumni Affinity Group to address this concern. We formed a board which included Sterling Wilder, who everyone on the planet who's Duke alumni knows, and Judy Woodruff, who's well known to everyone who reads the Washington Post and watches PBS, and has her own family experiences with a son with a disability. Now, let me turn this over to Jaden to take us through the next steps.
Thank you so much, Henry, for that lovely introduction and for your continued mentorship and support, literally 24/7 at Duke. So thank you so much. I am so honored to be here today and to be talking to Judy Woodruff, who is a senior correspondent and until 2023 was the anchor and managing editor of the PBS NewsHour. She has covered politics and other news for 5 decades at NBC, CNN, and PBS. She was NBC's White House correspondent before she became chief Washington correspondent for the McNeil-Lehrer NewsHour on PBS. Afterwards, she anchored Inside Politics for CNN before returning to PBS in 2007. Additionally, in 2022, Judy began a series called Disability Reframed, where she illuminates the stories and challenges of people with disabilities across the country. Judy is also a Duke graduate and a Duke trustee emerita. She and her husband, Al Hunt, are the parents of 3 children, the oldest of whom, Jeffrey, was born with spina bifida and experienced a brain injury as a teenager. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Jaden. I'm so glad to be with you and so pleased to be part of this important conversation.
Thank you. So before we begin, I'd love to just discuss a few objectives that I have of our conversation today. I learned this technique from a physician that I spoke to a few weeks ago, so I just want to set up a few kind of guidelines to guide our conversation. First, I would love to just share our own stories and our own role in the disability community and kind of what it means for us to share our stories with everyone. Next, I would love to talk about the importance of community and sharing our stories and how the Duke Alumni with Disabilities Affinity Group really is going to aim to do that and to make connections between the undergrad and graduate communities. And lastly, I would love to discuss how we can increase visibility about disability studies and education and employment, and how the Duke Alumni with Disabilities Affinity Group also hopes to do this and to connect Duke undergrads to resources post-graduation. So thank you so much. So To begin, Judy, many people know you as an accomplished journalist and PBS anchor, but fewer know about your role as a mother and caretaker. Could you share a bit about your son and how that experience has shaped your outlook on life and work?
Jaden, thank you so much. And as I said, I'm so pleased to be part of this important conversation. I'm so glad that Duke is sponsoring this kind of work, this kind of initiative, and so I'm really thrilled to be here. And I do want to say that I'm going to talk about my own family experiences, but we very much want to talk about Jaden's experiences too, because I think it certainly helps fill out the picture of so much of what we're talking about today. You're right. We have three children. Our oldest, Jeffrey, was born in 1981, so he's now 44 years old. I can't believe it. But he was born with as it turned out, and we did not know this ahead of time, with a mild form of spina bifida. And so he was born with that. And within 10 hours, he had to be operated on to close up that opening at the base of his spine. When he was 10 months old, because spina bifida is so often associated with hydrocephalus, which is a buildup of cerebrospinal fluid in the brain and the spinal column. He had a shunt implanted to drain additional fluid. Of course, you can imagine all that was very scary for us, but he came through all this with flying colors. He walked at 13 months. He was basically able to do what all other kids could do, except he couldn't run quite as fast. His legs weren't as developed. And he rode bikes, he skied, was a great skier. What happened when Jeff was 16, though, his doctor recommended he needed a shunt. I mentioned the shunt that was put in as an infant, that he needed a replacement. And what happened during that surgery was something went wrong, and Jeffrey ended up experiencing a brain injury that left him in a coma for 5 months, that left him unable to walk again, without assistance, with visual impairments, speech impairment, and a loss of short-term memory. So a lot changed, and what they call hemiparesis, where half of his body was not able to do what it should do, and putting it in layperson's terms. And so we went from having a child who had just finished his exams in 10th grade to being someone who was at about a 3rd grade level in school because of all the other issues. He spent a year out of school, went back to high school, was able to finish, even went on to college. I'll tell you the story about that. His younger brother was applying to college, and Jeffrey said after 4 years at community college, he wanted to go away to school. And at this point, Jeffrey had full-time companion during the day in order to go to school. We found a school in North Carolina that offered the kind of housing and other supports that students with physical disabilities need, because Jeffrey was using a wheelchair. So he went there 4.5 years, was able to graduate, got his bachelor's degree. We celebrated, but of course he still had so many of these other issues, and he went on to live in a supportive community. He lives in a group home in Maryland, a little more than an hour from where I live and my husband live in Washington, D.C. So he is able to do many things, but he has had medical issues over the years, not at such a severe level that it's caused us great worry. I will say within the last year, there have been some orthopedic issues because of a fall that he took. And we're continuing to deal with that. But it's been a life-changing experience for our family, Jaden, as you can imagine. And Jeffrey, at the same time, is the same person that he was on the inside. He's able to still do many things, but there are limitations.
Yeah, I can imagine how difficult that must have been to see such a drastic transition at age 16. But it's so amazing to hear everything that he's doing in that college and his independence. It's really so great to hear. I would love to hear more about what specific experiences did you notice kind of change after Jeffrey's injury, and how has this illuminated challenges that people with disabilities face on the daily?
Well, what I think and I'm very open about saying this, I like to think of myself, as probably most people do, as someone who was sensitive and aware of people with disabilities. And even after Jeffrey was born with spina bifida. I mean, we had a child with technical disability, but you would not know this by looking at him, that he had issues. For example, bladder and bowel incontinence. This is something, you know, embarrassing for a young person growing up, but we were able to handle it. And some learning issues that appeared in school. But I thought I was pretty aware of the disability community, but it really wasn't until after Jeff experienced the brain injury in 1998. And we were living suddenly with a child who was different in that he couldn't walk in the community. He was in a wheelchair. I noticed how people would hardly look at him. We would be out in the community, either going to dinner or taking a walk, and people wouldn't look at him, or they would say something very nice and then move on, and not even engage in a conversation with him, as if they assumed he wasn't able to engage in conversation, even if it was a little harder to understand him. And I began to, of course, notice and take all this in very personally, as a mother would. And over the years, I have become much more, because I've gotten to know many, many more people in the disability community. I've become, I'm sorry, somebody speaking in, okay, sorry about that. I've become just much more aware, and I think realize that so many people, for all of our desire to be aware and be sensitive, we don't treat people with disabilities as people. We think of them, I think so many of us, as something that's different, that they're not wholly there, and they're not a sentient human being, when in fact they are. They have so many of the same, I know my son does, hopes, dreams, aspirations, beliefs, as everybody else. And that's been a profoundly important lesson for me. And it's one of the reasons I've wanted to be involved as I can be in the disability supportive community.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I think that you brought up such a key point of the disabled community and how it's viewed from other people, and that people only focus on disability and what people can't do, and they don't look at the ability part of disability. And there are some, yes, our lives may be different. Everyone's own experiences with their own disability is different. But if we focus on what we can do as opposed to what we can't do, we completely change the angle at which we view this community that is the largest minority in America, actually. So
Which people don't realize.
Yes. Yeah.
People don't, and a lot of that I think has to do with, there's so many, as you say, different kinds of disabilities. But when you add it all up, this is the largest minority in the country.
Yeah. I had a student in my class the other day ask me, what defines a disability? And it took me a second to answer, because I realized that there is no singular definition. It can include chronic conditions, developmental disabilities, temporary injuries, learning disabilities. There's such a range. And so I think it's just so important to recognize that this community includes so many people from so many different areas and corners of the world. And so it's so important to kind of be open-minded with that definition and with our idea of what this community looks like.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
definitely. You also touched on another important point about how you said that you consider yourself like a rather empathetic person, but that you didn't realize kind of how much, not that you were missing, but just that you kind of weren't totally acknowledging until after Jeffrey turned 16 and had this injury. So you kind of bring up a point about how anyone can become disabled at any point in their lives for any period of time, and it can happen in an instant. And that is something that I think is unique about this community. So can you just speak more about how you personally noticed your mindset shift, any kind of shift in your daily activities, or kind of how you went about looking at the world around you once your mind was open to this other perspective of looking at the world?
And Jaden, there were so many ways that happened. I mean, I started to notice something I should have noticed before, but how many people are there with disabilities that are visible? You're right. Many disabilities are not visible, but how often would I see them in the workplace? There was a time I started out my career in Washington working at NBC, then PBS, moved around a little bit, then to CNN. And I remember at CNN, one of the producers I worked very closely with, she used a wheelchair and was as much a part of the team as everybody else, of course. But I started to notice, what places were open to individuals with disabilities and what weren't. I certainly would always notice when I went into a public building or even a private home, if it was how hard it would be for us to get Jeffrey in there. He wasn't always, of course, with us everywhere we went, but I was always thinking, these stairs would present an obstacle. How could someone in a wheelchair possibly go into this restaurant or this store? No matter how quaint that little store may be in a quaint tourist site somewhere. Certainly, and when we traveled internationally, I will say this, and we were lucky to do that several times with our family. We would take the whole family. And I realized then, of course, how much ahead of the rest of the world the United States is in many respects, in that we do have more physical openings. And of course, so much of that is due to the Americans with Disabilities Act that passed in 1990. But we still, and so we're better in many respects than the rest of the world, but we still have a long way to go. Of course, it's mandated for much of the public infrastructure. But I think of it for the private infrastructure. How do you go visit a friend? How do you meet up for lunch? How do you meet up for coffee? And then there's the whole question of public transportation. And I think, the rest of us jump into a cab or an Uber and we don't think about it. But for individuals who have any sort of physical disability, they've got to count on transportation that allows them to move. And the same thing would be, issues around those with visual or hearing. Being deaf, all of those things come into play. And I'm just much, much more aware of how far we've come, yes, but how far we still have to go.
Yes, definitely. I think the awareness is definitely a key piece that at least is something that I have hoped to kind of spread to my friends and community members and peers at Duke. In the disability narratives class that I teach every Tuesday evening, we just had an assignment this week where each student had to spend at least an hour navigating Duke's campus, trying to emulate a perspective of a certain disability and to kind of see the campus from that perspective. And we spent an hour discussing the experiences of the students. And one student brought up that every single dorm on West Campus, at least almost every single dorm, every single door at almost all of the dorms, had at least 2 to 3 steps to enter to the door. And those 2 to 3 steps may just look like, a few inches that any average person could just walk up. But to anyone on crutches, on a wheelchair, on a knee scooter, who may have a knee injury and can't bend their knee, who may be have deficits in their vision, those steps can be the biggest barriers and can be the the thing that may prevent them from getting into their own dorm or getting into a building. And so it's exactly what you just mentioned about the things that kind of go unnoticed by people every day, but it can be the biggest barriers for others. Another experience was I was on a knee scooter freshman year, and Duke's campus is beautiful, don't get me wrong, and the cobblestones are absolutely gorgeous, but those cobblestones, they were so painful to get over in my knee scooter. And I've watched other people on wheelchairs trying to navigate them. And, you don't think about how those little 1 or 2 inch bumps or the crack in the curb is actually the difference between screeching in pain or being able to enter a certain place. So I think that's a really great point that you bring up about how it's about us just being more aware of our surroundings and what's around us and how different people see the world and what they need in order to have equal access to the things that everyone else can access.
And I think the more we have these conversations, the better it is, because we know, I mean, underlying all this, so many employers, people who own buildings or who own businesses, speak about the cost of making accommodations, whether, as you said, it's stairs, ramps, looking at public bathrooms that are accommodating hotels when you travel. And of course, many hotels, I've learned, will tell you they have accommodative rooms, but when you get there, you find out it's really it's not truly accommodating. So I think this is a conversation I believe we have to have over and over and over again. The more we raise the visibility of this, the better it is.
Yes, definitely. I like to use the kind of phrase band-aid on a bullet hole, in that it's one thing to meet all of the requirements of the ADA, and it has made incredible progress as we have seen in the past 25 years. But it's actually about the intention and the thought behind the enforcement of the ADA. And there's also a kind of like rallying saying of the disability advocacy community that says, nothing about us without us. And
Yeah.
I think that that is so important because this perspective that people with disabilities see is unique. And it is something that people can try and see the world from this perspective, but unless you have the disability, it is very difficult to actually see the world in this way. And so, therefore, I think that
Yeah.
people with disabilities, whether physical, intellectual, whatever they may be, need to be included in the innovations made to these spaces because there has to be thought and intention behind how these accommodations are going to be used.
You're,
For
you're
example,
absolutely, yeah,
I
go
was
ahead.
trying to get to my chemistry lecture, and it took me an extra 15 minutes to get around and find the handicap accessible entrance. Because, yes, there was one, but it was down a steep hill, which is difficult to get to when you're on an e-scooter or wheelchair, around
Yeah.
the corner and through the back in the construction entrance. And then I had to go up another elevator. And so it's like, yes, that may exist, but is it practical? Is it usable? Is it, um, does it take an extra 15 minutes? The biggest thing that my students realized this week was that the extra time that it took to get to places, to get to classes, to open a door. And so that's something that if we are going to meet the requirements of the ADA, we have to do it with thought, intentionality, and caring for this community.
And I think if everybody in America could do what you asked your students to do, that is put themselves in the place of someone with disabilities trying to just navigate, going to the grocery store, going anywhere, as you say, going into a classroom building, a public building, and certainly, visiting friends and so forth. If they could put themselves in that situation, I think we would begin to see change. Jaden, I want to go ahead. I'm going a little bit out of order, but I want to go ahead and turn this around and ask you about your own experience. As Dr. Friedman said at the outset, you have lived with a diagnosis. Tell us exactly what that is, because you have, in my estimation, have been heroic in your ability to do everything you have done despite what you've had to put up with. Just put it in your own words, please.
Thank you. Yeah. So at age 5, I was diagnosed with a type 1 osteogenesis imperfecta, which is a rare genetic condition that affects 50,000 people in the US. And it is a collagen deficiency that ranges from very mild type 1, which I have, to very severe and even lethal type 18. I've broken over 25 bones throughout my life and had several surgeries, including an ankle reconstruction in 8th grade. Which was followed by a 13-month recovery. And I finally went to school without any mobility devices on my last day of 8th grade, which was a really great day. But something about my disability is that it's actually barely visible from the outside. The only physical tales are my scars from over 100 stitches on my left leg and ankle, and then also the whites of my eyes are actually blue. It's called blue sclera because of the collagen deficiency. But other than that, you really wouldn't know that I have a disability, and so I think that that has actually given me a very unique perspective. And I would actually say that I actually have the luxury of living my life part-time disabled. And the reason why I call it a luxury is because I have this unique perspective where I get to see the world from both the able-bodied and the disabled perspectives. So one day, as I mentioned, I'll be walking on the cobblestones, going to the Perkins Library on 2 legs, and then the next I'll be rolling down that exact same path on an e-scooter and seeing those challenges, opening that door, the curb, from a completely different perspective. And so I've kind of experienced exactly what we just talked about, how these little obstacles that go unnoticed can actually be the biggest barriers for people with various disabilities.
And
Um,
Jaden, no, I want to
yeah.
interrupt here because yes, you've had this diagnosis, but you've also been very active in athletics. So
Mhm.
tell us about that and how you've managed to do that.
Yeah, so athletics have really been a huge part of my life, mostly because of my two brothers, who are both lacrosse and hockey players, and always growing up in kind of a active household. But I've really just kind of found ways to focus on what I can do, not what I can't. And so from age 5, I started competitively swimming, which has been a part of my life for the past 16 years, and has just been a really safe way for me to interact in a team environment without the risk of getting hurt. But I've also skied and played lacrosse my whole life as well. And I've actually only had 2 injuries with those 2 sports. I unfortunately got into a ski accident last December and fractured my tibia and fibula in 4 places and had to get helicoptered, which was a fun adventure to be in a helicopter in a blizzard. But I would also say that with lacrosse, I unfortunately did get injured every single season, but it was my favorite sport. And so I kind of just played until the point at which I got injured. And I think an example of that was my junior year of high school. I actually ruptured my Achilles on the second day of tryouts. And it definitely, dampened my mood for the first few days. I was really looking forward to the season. But instead of kind of being sidelined by the injury, I actually thought about what I could do with the injury. And so I decided to become the team manager for the next 2 years. And that was a really great experience because I realized that I could still warm up the goalie while on my knee scooter. I could still have a catch with my teammates. I could still be the cheerleader on the sidelines. I could still help with the scoreboard and the stats. And so there was so much that I still could do, even though I couldn't physically run, play lacrosse. And I think that those experiences, being on a team in high school and being supported by so many cheerleaders and friends and peers, has really propelled me to pursue and try and continue to do so much in college, despite kind of the challenges that I've faced.
I think anybody listening to your story would marvel at the very least at what you have done. What's the secret sauce? What is it that propels, as you just said, Jaden, to try all these things despite what your diagnosis is?
Yeah, I think I would say 2 things. One, it would just be the consistent encouragement and support from my family and friends to, as my dad says, to make lemonade out of the lemons that life gives you, and really just focus on what you can do, not what you can't. And I think that that's all about just having a positive mindset. There's no point of looking at the glass as half empty because that's all you have. All you have is what you have, and it's about what you do with what you have that really makes the superpower behind it. And so really just focusing on that element. And then the other element would be the power of connection. And so I actually look at every single one of my 25 injuries as a data point of me gathering experience and being able to connect with exponentially more people with each experience that I have. And so, with each surgery that I have, whether it's an ankle reconstruction, Achilles rupture, bone chips, whatever it may be, that's, 1,000 more people that I can connect with. Even since my last injury last December, I got a metal rod put in my leg and a bunch of plates and stuff. And I think I've met maybe 5 or 6 people in the past year who also have a metal rod in their leg. And we've had conversations for hours about the pain that can come from a metal rod, or how do you navigate going through the airport and going through a metal detector, or, you know, what kind of exercise was the most effective when you were recovering. And seeing that connection over that experience, seeing that kind of, okay, wait, someone else gets it. Like I trust this person. Um, that is really kind of what empowers me and keeps me going.
Well, I think I'm in awe reading about you before this conversation today and getting to know you a little bit, and even now, even more so, listening to you describe what you do. I think everybody who hears this has to be in awe. So, and I think it's such a great lesson for everybody who's dealing with any kind of disability.
Thank you so much. Well, I'd love to switch gears and talk about kind of your work in journalism and specifically how you have used your journalism background to illuminate the experiences of people with disabilities. So, kind of to begin, I would just love to ask you this question. you asked me the question about my secret sauce. I want to know, what are your superpowers and how have you leveraged those superpowers, those social connections, those experiences and stories that you know, to kind of make positive change for this community?
And I will tell you, Jaden let me know ahead of time she was going to ask me this question. And I had to say, now, Jaden, I don't know what superpowers are. I know what yours are. I'm not sure what mine are, but I'll give this one I'll try. Um, just to begin, I think after, living with our son Jeff's experiences and understanding what he's been going through, it's made me, as I said a few minutes ago, much more aware of what's going on in the world and how many people have, whether they are visible or whether they are hidden, have challenges that we all need to be aware of. So I've been very conscious of it in the workplace. I mentioned, when I worked at CNN many years ago, I'm very aware of it now at PBS. I'm very conscious of the policies of the places where I work and of other companies, other organizations I come in contact with. How sensitive are they to, how aware, how respectful are they of whether it's employees or people they deal with, people they do business with, or people with disabilities? Because this is as we know, this is such a cross-cutting issue. And there are so many different ways that we need to be thinking about disabilities. And so that's been something that I've had to work on. But now I think it becomes much more automatically to me to think about, to look around and say, okay, do they have anybody working here who has a disability? What is the policy? And one other part of this, of course, as a journalist, has been, and this has two parts. One part is looking at government policy, both at the federal level, state and local levels. What are policies around individuals with disabilities? And of course, this too is cross-cutting. We know the Americans with Disabilities Act passed in 1990. Later, there was an update in legislation there, but there are so many other pieces of legislation around healthcare, around education, that affect what people with disabilities have in terms of special education, in terms of access to healthcare. And so these are all areas that I try to follow closely, even though my main interest as a journalist is in politics. It is cross-cutting. There are so many different areas, and my colleagues who focus either as reporters or producers or editors, whether they are focused on medicine and healthcare, science, on the law, the Supreme Court, because we know there have been many court rulings that affect people with disabilities. Enforcement of the law, that's another big piece of all this. There's so many different aspects of government policy that we follow. And in the political realm, politicians, I believe, running for office should be asked more often, what's your position on, fill in the blank, whatever the issue is that's coming up, whether it's transportation for people with disabilities or housing accommodations or, the list goes on. And then the other area that I will mention is highlighting the lives of people with disabilities in my reporting. And so at the NewsHour, I started a series of reports several years ago. We've called it Disability Reframed, and we've done a series of reports, and we are continuing to do them. And I will say this right now, thanks to the generous support of the Ford Foundation, which has supported this reporting specifically on PBS. We've looked at everything from the housing shortage, the severe housing shortage for individuals with significant disabilities who have the kind of disabilities that require special accommodation where they live. We've profiled individuals. I interviewed one young man who lived in an apartment in Rochester, New York, who he couldn't turn his wheelchair around in the kitchen. He could only enter and back out. He could enter and go in reverse. He couldn't turn around. He couldn't do any of the kinds of regular work that anybody would do to cook or take something out of the refrigerator and so on. And the same issue, we found that we profiled what was going on the West Coast. So this is something that's all over, an issue that's all over the country. We've done reporting on the pay that individuals with disabilities receive. We know that many states have a waiver and they allow below the minimum wage for people to be paid to people with disabilities, and how this has become a voting issue in a number of states. And we've looked at that. We've also looked at the challenges facing families with loved ones, family members who have disabilities, intellectual disabilities that require so much family support that they need additional government support in order to do what they must do for their loved one. For example, we profiled a mom who was taking care of a teenage daughter. She had other children too. The teenage daughter had a serious developmental delays and disabilities that required so much help, and she had to be watched all the time. And the mother was trying to juggle going to work, having enough income to put food on the table, and keeping her daughter safe, and finding any kind of support that she could to make sure her daughter was looked after when she had to be at work. So the issues are endless out there, and this is just some of the reporting that we've done. But I like to call on all news organizations to do more. I know there's a lot to cover right now. There's a whole lot going on in Washington, D.C. and around the country. But I think news organizations, all of us, need to be doing a better job covering this.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I really appreciate how your series is illuminating like the daily experiences of people with disabilities. And it's not just focusing on the extreme challenges or, the sob stories or the extremely inspirational stories, which are amazing, but it's really also focusing on just the daily experiences, the living, the work, the independence, the caretaking, the things that often just go unnoticed in our media because they may not catch enough attention. And I think that's a really great point that you bring up, because there are so many models of disability that our media tries to fit these experiences into, whether it is the charity model, so only showing
Right.
people with disabilities as being charity cases and objects of pity, or whether it's the medical model, showing them as things that need to be cured, or objects that need to be fixed. And so by really showing their experiences, what a day in their life looks like, that's just illuminating a part of their narrative that often goes unnoticed. And I think that's really important. That's also something that I hope to bring to Duke as well. In that I was just discussing with the heads of the Duke undergrad community group called the Duke Disability Alliance about creating a project where we just create kind of like a board outside of our community space, and people can just post kind of little tidbits of their own story, their own challenges, their own experiences anonymously. And so that's just
Such
a
a great
way
idea.
for us as our undergrad community, graduate students as well, to just begin to show that the little experiences, the little challenges, the things that don't get, the spotlight of the news and the media.
Such a good idea. So important. As you say, that there's so many things that we could be doing that we're just not thinking about. So it takes a moment for people to think about it. And as you've done, Jaden, you and some of your colleagues and other students and members of the Duke community have begun to think about these things, have been thinking about these things. This kind of work, this kind of thinking and ideas should be being generated on college campuses and in communities around the country. College campuses, in a way, are a perfect community for this kind of thing to happen, because it's enclosed, self-enclosed in a sense. But we need more of that out in the community. But I certainly absolutely agree on college campuses, and I love the idea as a Duke alumna that Duke is taking the lead in the way Duke thinks about this.
Mhm. Yes. No, definitely. And I think that is another goal that at least I have in my last semester here, and hopefully kind of beyond after I graduate, is that Duke does have so many affinity groups and community centers and events, various events related to disability around the school, graduate programs and undergraduate. But we're kind of missing that unity amongst all of them. And so that's another goal of mine, I've been working with some of the leaders of these groups to create like a weekly newsletter that is going to share about speaker events and opportunities to bring kind of this community together, to leverage the Pratt engineering community, and to bring in the element of disability and design and creativity into this space. Because there are so many clubs and initiatives at Duke that are working with people with disabilities, and to also kind of bring in the graduate students as well. The medical school has a group for people with disabilities. So does the law school as well, and the faculty. So kind of bringing them all together and kind of creating this united force is definitely a goal of mine.
It's such a wonderful thing. You and others had invited me to join the Duke affinity group, the Disabilities affinity group, and I have to say I have learned so much from just my few months of membership in this group about the many ways that the many things that are being done as you just described, and the many possibilities there are for expanding this and expanding awareness of it. And as you just said, this does apply to every part of the Duke family, the Duke community, whether it's the engineering school, the law school, obviously the medical school. I mean, that makes sense. But for undergraduates, for the philosophy department, I mean, there are so many different strands and threads around these questions that you and I are talking about this afternoon. And I love the fact that the affinity group is working on that, and as you said, building community. And I know it's not easy because students are dealing with a lot, and people are focused on their grades or what they're doing after this semester. But this is something that's part of life, and it's something they will carry on into their lives after they leave Duke.
Yes, no, exactly. And I think that is the epitome of kind of the goal and the mission of the Duke Alumni with Disabilities Affinity Group, is creating that foundation and that structure and that community for undergrads who to have these resources, to have these connections as they graduate and as they kind of enter the real world and kind of navigate their life post Duke with a disability. And I think that also it's so important to recognize that we have this vast network of Duke alumni with various experiences. And so to be able to make these peer-to-peer connections, these mentorship connections over these shared experiences is a goal of the group, and is something that I really hope to do. One of our goals this spring is to create a disability disclosure and career panel about how to kind of think about disclosing your disability in the interview process when applying for jobs, and how to think about access and accommodations post grad, and living and being independent in a new city. And so I think that that's something that if we bring our community together, we connect the undergrad, the grad students, and the alumni. There's so much information, so many experiences, and just so much care amongst us. And I think that that is so unique, and something that I hope that we can create structure to leverage those experiences.
Oh, I think I mean, your point is so well taken. And I think, I mean, anything we can do to remove the stigma that still exists around disability, it's so much better than it was decades ago. But we still, as you and I have been talking, Jaden, we still have a long way to go. People still are hesitant or sometimes afraid to approach or engage with someone when they find out they have a disability. And then, of course, beyond that, to dig into and think about all these issues we've been talking about. And we need to just get this story out there so people realize it and understand it's not something we need to hide or be shy about or afraid to discuss. It needs to be out front and in the open.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And each story that we share, each experience that we illuminate is a million more, thousands, a million more people that we can connect with. And so, really, as you've said, through your journalism work, illuminating those experiences, sharing those stories, having more opportunities like this to have a discussion is, I think, that the first step that we need to take to build awareness, and to open this community and its arms.
Absolutely. You mentioned the disability disclosure panels and giving students and others the power, the authority to speak out about what they're dealing with, and to connect with alums. How do you think about reaching alums? Because of course Duke has alums all over the country and all over the world. How do you think about that challenge?
Yeah, no, that's a really great point. I think that probably the first step is redefining disability. And I think that as we talked about, disability includes so much, but also redefining it in the sense of anyone can become disabled at any point, and it's not this stigmatized label. It is this open community and this open network of experiences and support. And so kind of making it less intimidating to be a part of this community is definitely a goal of the affinity group. And so that's a goal that I have, as this first step to reaching these alumni. The next would be leveraging alumni weekend and homecoming weekend. We had an event this past September, and we're looking to plan one again for April, to have a career panel about disclosure and thinking about post grad with a disability. And then another way too is to create community events. So speaker events like this. We also are going to have a book club this coming year with one of our own board members, Doug. We're going to be reading his incredible book and just having a conversation. Beginning to share the story, share experiences. And then that last one would be also using the people that are on campus. So creating that unified network of undergrad and graduate students, and starting the awareness of the alumni network while they're still at Duke. So kind of
Yeah.
beginning to spread that word before they even leave Durham. So those are just a few of the goals, and I'm really looking forward to what we can do as a group and the community that we can build that spans all identities, all age, all across the whole country. So I'm really excited.
It is. There's so much. I mean, the more time I think anyone spends thinking about this and doing research and looking into it, the more we realize how much can be done, how much, not just how much should be done, but how much can be done
Hmm.
in creative ways that just haven't been done. And I think technology is part of that,
Yep.
realizing that there are ways to reach people that we couldn't before. I also think, and one thing we haven't talked about, Jaden, is in the entertainment community. And I know there have been efforts by various groups to work on this, but portraying individuals with disabilities as people, people
Yep.
with feelings and lives, normal lives. And we know that so much of what we watch on social media, television, movies, films, and so forth, I think too often leaves out the story of people with disabilities, and they need to be every bit a part of these stories that our friends in Hollywood and Broadway are telling too.
Yes. Yes, definitely. And I'm actually going to mention one film that I really love called Crip Camp that's on Netflix. And it is a documentary about a camp for people with intellectual disabilities in the 70s. And it just shows raw footage of the daily experience of these campers and then the community and bonds that they formed that then actually led to the passage of the ADA. 25 years ago. And so I think that that is an incredible movie that I feel like I hope that the entertainment industry can kind of take after that example, and really begin to show the raw experiences and daily lives of people with disabilities.
And it's so interesting because that film featured my late good friend Judy Heumann,
Uh-huh.
who was, of course, one of the
Hmm.
original activists in the disability community pushing for the ADA. She attended that camp and is
Yep.
featured in so many wonderful ways in that documentary.
Yes.
And I was so pleased to see that come out, and we need more like that.
Yes.
On when we turn on the TV or look at our favorite show streaming on YouTube or wherever, we need to see more of that, more
Hmm.
portrayals in feature films and TV series too.
Yes. No, definitely. I definitely agree. Yeah. Time to switch it over to Q&A.
Wow, what a
Yeah.
wonderful conversation. And it's been very informative. So thank you both. There were a couple questions in the chat, but I do have a question that I just like the two of you to answer, and it goes along with what we're doing today. Um, Judy, through your series Disability Reframed, You centered the voices of disabled individuals in national conversations. What role do you think storytelling like today does to shift public attitudes and influence policy? And as a journalist, how can we better amplify those voices?
I think it's absolutely central to spreading the word and raising awareness and making sure that the issues that the disability community faces and that wants addressed by whether it's at the government, at the federal government level, or at the state or local level, that these issues are addressed. So we have to get the media and news media involved on a regular basis, and telling stories always is reliably the most important way to do that. When you tell the story, just as we heard Jaden tell her personal story, and to a different extent, when I tell some of the story about our son Jet, I think people connect with those stories. They connect with human beings and what human beings are living through. And as Jaden said, not as objects of pity or charity cases, but people who are, yes, they've been dealt a tough hand. We can't deny that, but they are also, fighting their way through it and going on with life and accomplishing great things. We see that almost everywhere we look. And I think telling those stories, and so that people understand fully what it means to be a human living with a disability, whether it's visible or invisible, is just one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful way to do that.
Great, thank you. And Jaden, the work that you're doing on campus is remarkable. Are there other platforms or ways that you'd like to get this information out?
Yeah. So one platform that I would love to kind of just share about is the educational community. So I teach a house course at Duke, which is a student-led half credit course that meets once a week. And so that has been an incredible platform that I have used to kind of share more about the academic side of disability studies. And that has reached a vast network of students. We've had wide participation from students from all corners of the community, especially also from the athletics community. So I think that is also a way in a community that we can connect with and collaborate with, because many athletes unfortunately do have injuries as a result of their sports, and they have seen campus and seen these experiences from different perspectives. So I think that is one platform, one way that I hope to connect to that community. Another one would be through this initiative that we're beginning, where we're trying to unite all of the undergrad and grad disability community groups. We're trying to create at least the beginnings of a disability cultural center, which we know may take a little while, but just starting to begin to get the word out through our weekly newsletters, by posting things on the Duke Student Government page. We're going to update our Duke Disability Alliance website to also be to have more resources. We're also going to create a discussion kind of element to the Duke Disability Alliance website, where students can anonymously post questions, and can other peers who have had those experiences can respond and provide information. So those are just a few of the platforms, but we're really just kind of open to any ideas, and we just really want to bring and unify all of these efforts together.
Wonderful. And I do see that there is a link in the chat. If you're interested in learning more or staying connected with the Duke alumni, with the disabilities community, there is a link for folks that are on today to stay connected. Let's see if there's just another question. Um, Everyone's just thanking you for this, and then that link is there in the chat. Well, are there any final thoughts that either of you would like to share out to our captive audience today while we just got a couple minutes?
Well, I just want to thank Duke for doing this, for the Duke Affinity group project across the board, for doing this. I think it's so important. I certainly want to thank Jaden, because I think you can see she's not just a personal example of someone with a disability who's doing remarkably, amazingly well, who has overcome and will continue to overcome so much, but she's also a champion and a fighter and someone who's thinking all the time about how do we broaden the story? How do we get this word out there? How do we move even beyond even what anybody's been able to imagine so far? Thinking about things that I know when I started thinking about disabilities in 1998, when our son experienced his injury, I didn't even begin to be aware of. And so we've come a very long way, and people like Jaden are leading the charge, and I want to salute Jaden.
Great.
Thank you so much. I just want to express my gratitude to everyone that has supported me through everything. Whether it is Dr. Friedman helping me with my injuries here at Duke, the SCAO office, all of the faculty that have been involved with the disability community and have been there to help support me through my ideas, all of the students who have, joined me in learning and discussing this topic. I'm really just so grateful for the support at Duke. And I'm also so excited about what's to come. I think that obviously, like every other Duke student, I am very sad to be graduating in the spring. But I know that with this affinity group, my work here and my interaction with this community will not stop after I leave. And so my main goal of this last semester is just to take my experience and create a platform so to help others kind of join, and then for them to help them connect with other people and to just continue to have this ripple effect in this community. And just to create this foundation for future change. And so I hope that the affinity group will begin to make this web of connections in the alumni community. I hope that by bringing the undergrad and graduate students together, we can also bring community to on campus. And then I also hope through the house course that I've been teaching for the past few years, we can begin to take steps towards creating a disability studies curriculum and really improving the education at the academic level. And so I'm truly just so grateful for all the support I've had, and so excited to see what's to come. So thank you so much.
Let's remember, Jaden, that Duke has a rather wonderful medical school.
Great.
No pressure.
Great. So thank you, Jaden, Judy, and Henry for a great discussion, and to our audience for joining us. Today's session was recorded and will be posted on the Duke Alumni Lifelong Learning YouTube channel. Thank you.